Over the weekend, a friend of mine dropped off his LTZ400 for me to take a look at it, check out a few things. He's been having some issues with this thing being hard to start, and once it does start, it smokes excessively. I also noticed that it was leaking fuel. We're going to remove the valve cover, we're going to remove the head, we're going to change the valve seals, we're going to lap the valves in, we're going to reset the timing, then I'm going to clean out the carburetor jets, I'm going to reset the float height and get this thing running tip top again. All right, so I got this thing started up and it's smoking a lot. Take a look at this. All right, so I'm gonna start removing the plastics. And to remove the plastics, there's a combination of hardware as well as plastic fasteners. I'm using a car interior trim tool to remove all these plastic fasteners. Works perfectly for the job. Once the side covers are removed, I'm going to remove the two bolts holding in the gas tank. Next, I'm going to disconnect the fuel line. And now I should be able to lift out the gas tank. Next, I'm going to start on the removal of the carburetor. There's one electrical connector that I need to remove, and then there's a clamp that needs to be loosened on the intake boot, and then another clamp that needs to be loosened on the boot leading to the air filter. Once those clamps are removed, I can pull back the boot that leads to the airbox, and that'll give me enough space to remove the carburetor. Once the carburetor is free, still have to disconnect the throttle cable. To gain access to remove the throttle cable, there's 3 screws that need to be removed as well as an access plate. And I can disconnect the cable and unscrew it from the top of the carb. I was trying to adjust the idle on this thing and I was wondering why the adjustment wasn't doing anything, and you'll see here that the idle screw adjustment mechanism is broken. The cable inside this hose just got corroded and rusted away. Next, I'm going to remove the float bowl, but first I have to get past these stripped out screws. Take a look at this screw holding that float pin in place. It's loose. I'm willing to guess that's why this thing was leaking gas. Because that was loose, the float valve wasn't able to close properly. Next, I'm going to remove each of the jets and make sure that they're clear of any debris. Once all the jets are clear, we can reassemble the carburetor. Now that the carburetor is done, we can set that aside and get started on the top end. First, I'm going to start removing the vent lines and the spark plug cable. Next, I'll remove the 3 bolts that hold the valve cover onto the cylinder head. Some ended up being tighter than others. Once those 3 bolts are out, the valve cover should just lift right out of place. Just be careful because you have a rubber gasket underneath that you're going to want to reuse if it's still in good condition. Now that the valve cover is removed, we can see a portion of the cams exposed here. You can see the lobes, and they look like they're in really good shape from what we can see so far. I don't see any wear at all. Once we get these cam holders removed, we'll be able to see the rest of the cams to verify the condition. Before I remove those cam covers or cam holders, I'm going to set the engine at top dead center. That'll relieve the pressure or any pressure that is on those lobes from the springs. In order to do that, first I need to remove these two covers from the side of the motor. Next, I'm going to remove the cam chain or the timing chain tensioner to loosen up the chain to make it easier to get the cams removed. And you can see now we have free play in the cam chain. Next, I'm going to remove the bolts that hold the cam holders into place. There are two bolts that are just a tiny bit longer, and those are the ones that hold the timing chain guard in place. When you remove these, be careful not to lose your dowel pins because there are two dowel pins under each cover. Alright, next I disconnected the exhaust. Now I'm going to drain the coolant. It's going to be a slow drip until I remove the radiator cap. Then you'll see it really start to flow. Now with the coolant drained, I can remove the radiator hoses. Next, I'm going to remove the cylinder head bolts. I'm going to loosen these up just a little bit at a time in a crisscross pattern before fully removing them. And don't forget that you also have two bolts that you should remove first, two 8mm bolts that are located on the side of the motor. Each one of these head bolts also has a washer, and sometimes they get stuck just sitting there in the head, and I just use a magnet tool to remove those washers and then put them back on the bolts until I'm ready to reinstall them. There's a bolt in the side of the head that prevents the cam chain from falling back into the engine case. You need to remove that bolt, but first you need to tie up the cam chain so it doesn't fall into the engine cases. Next, I'll remove the upper support bracket, and then the cylinder head should lift out easily. So with the cylinder head removed, first they had a head gasket that had gasket maker Permatex on both sides of it. And then underneath that, there was another paper gasket. So I'm not sure exactly why they did that. All right, I cleaned up the head surface where it mounts to the cylinder. There were some burrs here that I cleaned up, and I'm assuming that's why they had this thing loaded up with extra gaskets and RTV, because this burr wasn't allowing it to seal properly. So next we're going to start on removing the valves, or the valve springs and the valves. Here I'm using a valve spring compressor tool to compress the valve springs. Then I'm going to use a magnet to remove the keepers. Sometimes these can be a little bit tricky. You need to get the springs compressed just right, and try not to lose the tiny keepers. When you're removing these springs, not only do you have the cap on the top of the spring, but there's also one at the bottom as well that needs to be removed once the spring comes out. Well, with these valves removed, you can see that the surfaces look pretty decent, as well as the seats. I am going to lap these in just very lightly, just to make sure that we have a nice flat fading surface between the valves and the seats. You can see the seat for this exhaust valve does have some carbon buildup, so lapping these in and then cleaning it up afterwards is going to be good for these valves. And finally, here we are with the last one. Next, we can remove the valve seals, and these easily pull out with some needle nose pliers. Sometimes they can be a little bit brittle and come apart. For the most part, these came out fairly easy. Now I'm going to be using this Permatex valve grinding compound to lap the valves in. I'll put a small amount on the valve as well as on the seat. And after lapping them in, I'll use some brake cleaner to thoroughly clean the entire area and remove any carbon deposits that are left behind. Okay, so we have the new valve seals installed. I already popped these two valves into place. They feel good, nice and tight.
and go up and down a little bit. I have some oil in these valve stems. I'm just getting this oiled up before I push it through. Next, I'm going to put in the spring seats, and then we'll put the springs in.
When I reassemble this head, all these parts go back exactly as they were disassembled, meaning the springs, the seats, the keepers, etc. all go back in the same place that they were removed from. This includes the shims and the buckets as well.
Next, we're going to compress the springs and put the retainers in. You can see the retainers are both seated.
Next, I'm going to install the Comatic head gasket. Then I'll install the head. You also have to fish the cam chain through the head and head, as well as the cam chain guides. Next, I'll drop the head bolts into position, and I'll lightly run them in preparation for the torque sequence.
Right now I'm going to torque these down in a crisscross pattern, and I'm going to do it with 4 levels. So I'm starting with 5 pounds right now, 5 foot-pounds. I want to work my way all the way up to 34. Alright, so that's 5. I'm going to go up to 10. Now I'm going to go up to 18. $34.
Once the main head bolts are torqued down, now I can reinstall the side bolts. Next, I'll install the cam chain bolt. Be sure that you don't over torque this and deform or crack the head. Now I can set the engine to top dead center. You want to align the line next to the T with the arrow or the tick mark that's on the case. You don't want to align it with the T itself. You'll see that there is a tick mark right next to the T. You'll see here that this one needs to be adjusted just slightly. Now I can install the cams. I'm going to do the exhaust cam first. You want to install these with the lobes facing outwards to get the general orientation. Then you can install the intake cam. Then for final alignment, make sure that your timing marks are in the correct positions. Use your finger through the hole for the chain tensioner, apply tension to the cam chain, and then double check your mark. With your cam lobes facing outwards, you should have one tick mark that faces directly up, perpendicular to the surface of the head. And then the other two tick marks should be parallel with the surface of the top of the head, just like pictured here.
Don't forget to put your pins in. There's a total of 4 before you put your cam caps back in place. We're going to drop these bolts into place. Now don't forget that the 2 bolts that are just a fraction longer are the ones that go into this chain cover or protector. And then the other 6 bolts are the same size.
Now with the timing set, I can add the chain tensioner.
Alright, so I've reconnected the radiator hose. I dropped the spark plug in. So now we're going to put the valve cover back in place. Alright, valve cover's on. Got the spark plug wire connected. Next I'm going to install the carburetor, connect the throttle cable, and then we can put the gas tank back on and try to fire this thing up.
right, we got another one that's ready to go.